this can also be used by someone who's like a professional. Like, I would use this, absolutely, because I know the fundamentals of pattern cutting. And the fact that I'm using this, it does not say anything about me cutting corners. If anything, this is going beyond any corner. This is creating more corners by doing this whole software thing. But
I think you will indefinitely have people as well who are not that interested in the fundamentals, right?
yeah,
They think, oh, okay, it's all fine with the fundamentals. I just want my pattern. So that would be most likely the people. Also, sometimes people who would be professionals who already are into it.
yeah.
And they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. I just want to get the pattern quickly.
If you do 100 patterns a week, you can make 100 patterns a day. Because all you need to do is type in 100 measurements 100 times a day, and the whole thing does it for you, right? And because the figuration aspect of this, the pattern you get, as long as you observe the figure correctly, is going to be as bespoke as you can get a pattern. So it's not going to be like random block generator, It's not going to be something like that.
No, absolutely. I guess so, because in my head, that what I'm picturing a scenario where I know nothing about pattern cutting. I find this software, I print out my first pattern.
And you're going to think you're the best pattern cutter ever.
Yes. I go on to a fitting, and it doesn't look perfect,
Right.
because no fitting ever does. Then where am I? Because I don't necessarily know what running on looks like. And so how do you then incorporate understanding the fit, which we will do in the future, but as simplified?
Well, I would say for now, I assume that this is going to be simultaneously developed with the videos that we're developing. So if you get to this stage and actually are using this, I think we already have the videos online on how to fit, and the videos on how basically why is this the way it is. We're going to have all of that online. So that's roughly the idea.
Yeah.
Now we're not going to get to the editors so far. So I'll close this. Any questions regarding this so far?
I was just thinking about the viewpoints and really honing in on videos to show like this is what a hips forward figure looks like.
Yes.
Probably a picture of me. Look at her hips.
Yeah.
Just to make it like super obvious, because if you're saying that the most important thing isn't actually the measurements, it's the observation.
Yes.
It's how you train these newbies' eyes or professional eyes to look at people's bodies in a different way to what they're used to. I think those videos were really important.
Yeah, I agree.
No, totally agree. I don't know if and forgive me if I've said this
No,
story
go
before.
for it, man.
I went to a physical, like a personal trainer for a while. The first thing he did, because he had like a master's in biomechanics or something, he goes, I want you to stand next to that wall. And he's like, all right, so your shoulders drop, you have a hip this way. And I was like, you're picking things out better than I can. And from that point, I was like studying anatomy and knowing how we're shaped is probably the most important part of what we do.
Yeah.
And so getting pictures of real life human beings who have those in various degrees, and also just wearing different clothes, because I think that's one of the big challenges.
Yeah.
Someone's in a big jumper.
Seeing the figure through the clothes.
Yes,
Yeah.
having that X-ray vision.
Yeah.
And honing that will be probably then the biggest skill to teach everyone.
Yeah. And how to translate what you observe into the pattern.
Yeah. And I think the only way I can see doing that is having as many case studies, like there's a picture book of drop shoulders. Here's 25 different drop shoulders of varying degrees and severities.
Yeah.
And then we can start honing our eyes, and you can then even layer it, because I've always thought, I'll do it like this. If you had a grid behind someone, so you can really see.
Count the squares of the slope, for example.
Yeah.
But just seeing that I'm going to drop my hands up. Seeing that and then being able to remove that grid behind that person.
Yes.
So then you're like, okay, I can see how severe it is. Now I'm going to take that away and try to focus in on not having that guide, because that's what we do in real life.
You could almost make it a quiz as well, like a bit of a game.
Yes.
They start, they're like,
Yeah.
okay, what do you think's wrong with this figure?
Yeah,
yeah,
What's the disfigurations? And you're like, "Du-du-du-du-du," and they're like, did you get it right?
Yeah, I think that's
quiz.
Yeah,
I
And then you find out you're Hogwarts in the end.
I think that's a fantastic idea because
Yeah.
that makes the learning material also interactive. And I don't know if you guys have missed that with cutting books, but what I definitely have missed is that they tend to talk, which is just like one long monologue, but they never tell you like, so let's confirm that you've understood what we just read or what we just talked about. And I think the medium of video and the quiz thing can make that very accessible. And also what you said with the grid.
I think the grid's a good idea.
Yeah, I think you
Like,
could.
that's your education.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah.
quizzes without the grid.
Exactly.
Do it now!
Exactly. You know, you could use animation for that. You know, remove the grid, bring the grid back, or you could even create another tool, which is like the figuration analyzer, which projects a grid after you upload your photo. You can then assess by, you know, how many blocks or whatever. Anyway, so this is roughly what the app that we're developing is going to look like. Now, why and how is going to be all documented in something else. So what the app is going to calculate as you go through all of that is the document of, let's start with the first one, where is it? So, and this at some point, once we have kind of like matured this a little bit and this is tested and all the defects are taken out, this is just going to be public thing. So everyone has access to this. They don't need to pay for any of this. It's just like, do you want to learn how the system works? That's how, you know, go for it. So I've written it like this because it would be easier for the person who's going to, to see everyone as an action in a specific sequence.
Can you zoom it a bit? Can you zoom it in?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So it's going to be something like this, and it's all point to point. So the only reduction of points I get is when the app is developed, you don't see any points. You just see the pattern.
Yeah.
But for this, there has to be points. So what we would do, and I think we could do this in a second. I thought maybe we could go through a pattern for all three of us.
Yeah.
Because we've got enough time, and we could do one for you, and one for me, or one for Mowgli even, and we can just test it out. Because I've addressed most of the figures that, or pretty much all the combinations there is. Although I need to add the options for a belly. I haven't done that yet, but that's fine. So the first thing is the main frame. You know, we are going to use all of the measures there, and then we go to the next page, which is going to be the neck, the shoulders, and the chest line. That's all universal for whatever figure. It doesn't matter. And then after that, we'll go through front side and back side. Again, that's universal. And then at this point, it's going to ask for 3 different hip placements. Now, I had to split the file, so you only see one. But it's a backwards hip, neutral hip, and a forwards hip. So let's say we choose backwards hip. Then here it asks us basically how backwards is it. And I mean, this is not super accurate yet, but at the same time, I was thinking about if you ask someone about their observation, most people are not going to be hyper technical about it. Like, how crooked is that line? You would say a little bit, medium, or a lot. So what I did was I just assigned, based on my experience and what I would do during the pattern cutting stage, a number or a measurement for a backward, a little bit, for medium, and a lot. We could go through these and change these at any time if we see fit. But backwards hip creates the side body and the back in a slightly different way. Neutral hip does that differently, and forwards hip does it differently as well. And it's all based on those wedges that we discussed previously. So then you do the backwards hip, and then it says, well, what's the gesture like? Now, we didn't talk about this previously. And what the gesture, I mean, I'm calling it gesture, and forgive me for calling it, so it's a bit misleading, but we can change the name as well. This is just like sketch. So what's the gesture? You can have a backwards hip, and you can kind of like stand a bit like this, maybe if you're old, but you can have a very large underbelly. And so if you look at the center of the chest from the side, and you look at the center from the hip line, bum and underbelly taken into account, how do these these 2 points connect? Now, you would think it's obvious if you have a backwards hip, it would be gesture backwards. But if you have a very large underbelly, it's going to be gesture neutral or maybe even slightly forward. So you determine the gesture because that changes the shape. Let's say it's like backwards gesture. That changes the shape of the underarm seam and it pushes it slightly backwards. But then after that, and again, you can have measures for this. Is it a lot backwards, medium backwards, or whatever? And then after that, it asks you about how wide the hip is in relation to the chest. So you choose one of these, let's say A shape, and they're all interlinked. So A shape is going to be asking you to let out these 2 points, even though you change the gesture of the underarm seam. And then you go through that, and then it asks you how big is the bust or the chest. Let's say it's like like big chest, like almost like bra-like bust, then the amount of the dart changes with that. But if it's like really big and it's like a super huge boob, let's say, then option 4 is going to have, like, for now, a neck dart as well. Because you can't take all of that. I mean, you can, but you don't want to take all of that out from one single point. So,
will every pattern have a neck cut that for the shoulder? As you were to get that?
No.
You've scrapped that now.
Well, it's not. It's an option you can go for because that dart is really more relevant if you're creating a very sculpted jacket. Because the more sculpted you are, the closer you are, and the arm side and the chest is like really close. And if you're sculpting something and it's like glued on the body, you really want to have that comfort, so you need to create a pivoted forward shoulder on the front panel, not just the ease on the back. That's not going to do anything. It's like the canvas has to be like that on the front. But if you're creating like a relaxed garment, even without canvas, or like just like any of these overcoats, you don't need to do that really. So then, let's say you've gone with the option that has a neck dart. Doesn't matter really. Next thing it's going to ask you is the hollowness. So let's say it's really hollow. Then again, every option has a different amount of intake at the underarm seam. So that addresses the underarm seam hollowness suppression. And how hollow is the back? Well, let's say really hollow again. And the intake here is going to be different. So if I would go back, and for example, I would go for option 1, I think the image is the same. Yeah, the image is the same. It's just that the options are different quantities of intake. But for example, forward hip also takes in the bottom of the back. But backwards hip doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So those are the slight variations. And then end. That's it. Done. Anything else that follows, it's either a different figure or a different combination.
Let's say I have a twin brother.
Yeah.
He wants a super tight suit, and I want a very relaxed suit.
Yeah.
And I go to Kimberly. We both go to Kimberly.
Yeah.
Putting in our configurations, which are identical, how does the system then incorporate, or is that down to Kimberly the cutter to then make adjustments to the style of the coat?
So that's a very good question actually, because I forgot to mention that. So this is what happens. The question, which I haven't really asked here, but the question the system will ask you is, out of these 4, and we're talking about hollowness of underarm seam, let's say, how hollow is the figure, he or himself, or herself? And you would say, well, if she's like this, we could always choose this to create a looser garment. You get me?
I see.
But if you're like this, we can't choose this, because that's going to mess up the fit.
Yeah.
So how this is going to be made easier to understand or explained or incorporated, that we can work that out.
Yeah.
But basically, if you do want a looser garment, you choose the looser option.
Got it.
But you can't go for a more fitted garment if the person isn't like this, and it's very difficult to then make a decision. Well, which one of these is it going to be?
But what would the standard fit? Would you say that's quite fitted in itself?
The standard is depending on your options.
But if I am
You're this.
figure option A,
Yeah, that's
or
it.
option 1 rather,
Yeah.
and I want a garment that is as fitted as possible for my body,
Yes.
would going through this process give me that as fitted as possible? Is that the
I see.
what's
Is there like a tolerance section at the end where you like, I want the tolerances to be really small so it's really svelte, or could I be like, I've done all my figurations but then I want it big, so I'm going to add like a couple of cms.
Well,
at the end
you
or
could
something.
do that. You could say just choose whatever the figure is,
Yeah.
and then reduce or add if based on whatever style you'd like,
Mm.
or you could choose what the figure is, ignore everything else, and then if you do want to make it slightly more sculpted or shaped, you just do that through the fittings. I would say, you know, so.
So will the thing that gets printed off be like tight or just loose and drapey?
There is
or?
in all of the patterns there is, for now, as a starting point, about 1.25 ease throughout the entire garment. So it's like in the middle. You could from that point either say that's fine, I'm okay with that. It's got enough movement, it's got enough shape, or you could say I'd like it to be a little bit more fitted or a little bit looser. But I think it's good to choose an amount of ease, whatever that's going to be. Something that doesn't fall into a style category, like fitted or drapey or whatsoever, but something in the middle, and that's a good starting point, I think. Because I do believe that if we address all of these things with the right quantities and all of that, chances are that there should be very little to change during the fitting. Like, I'm really aiming for perfect fit regardless of figure at any time, unless you're changing lapel shape or whatsoever. But like technically figure fit, I'm aiming for the absolute like average perfect kind of thing. And then of course there's always slight variations that you can do. So that's it. And then, you know, we're gonna observe each one of us. We can start with whoever and then go through it. And then
how does this? Because our last meeting, the big conversation was around shoulder.
Yeah.
How does that get incorporated?
I haven't worked it out yet because I'll tell you why. So there are a few things regarding shoulder angle which I don't know yet how to incorporate because it's a little bit it's evasive. And evasive in the sense that a new law I thought of or I observed rather is the bigger the belly or the chest, basically the bigger the distance from the flat tummy forwards requires the shoulder angle, or at least the front shoulder angle, to be more square. Inevitable. I'll tell you why. So I should have actually done something to illustrate this. So how can I do this with my hands? So imagine this is the shoulder angle and this is the body, right? And it's like a fairly slopey shoulder, right? Now, at the moment, the body is flat, garment is hanging. It's just like hanging vertically. But as a belly is introduced, or a very large chest, or even like a very prominent boob, what happens is this is pushed forward, the garment. The front panel is pushed forward. Now, the shoulder point can be okay here when it's hanging, but as it moves forward, it's being pushed forward, the neck point stays on the same place. But if this is not released and let out and therefore made more square, what's going to happen is this is going to tilt sideways. You get what I mean? Yeah. So you can have a very square shoulder angle on the front panel on someone who has a very sloped shoulder but a very big belly. And you can already guess how complicated the calculation of that becomes because, well, how am I going to tell how big your belly is in relation to the front shoulder angle? That's like, what the hell do I do with that? Because we assume that everything always hangs. And if you're a hanger, then everything will hang. But if you're like a bit wider, then you get these variations. And then it's like, is this a chest issue or an angle issue? Or, you know what I mean? So, or a dart issue. And I have to think, or we have to think, for a very clever way to incorporate that.
Yeah.
Because it has to work every single time.
So that means even going back to taking an actual shoulder angle measurement for someone with a prominent belly wouldn't work.
It wouldn't work 100% unless you manipulate it along the way with the knowledge that a bigger chest or belly. But that's not really elegant, is it?
Yeah, and that's a variable as well, because then the question is how much.
Yeah.
How big is the belly? How much is the angle combined?
So the safest, the all-time safest is just to have a very square shoulder angle, which you pick up during fittings.
Yeah.
That's the safest, because it's not going to mess up any other balance things, right? Worst case scenario, it just collapses on the shoulder and you get like a fold there, but it's not going to twist the entire fabric. Whereas a dodgy shoulder angle too low is going to lift everything up and it's going to be like a pheasant.
Yeah, because ultimately, as you said, everything hangs, but it's not. The shoulder is not as important as the neck point.
How do you mean?
Because the neck point, if that is out, then we're going to have things swinging away or being or kind of riding on. Whereas if this is too square, the neck point is right. That should still stay relatively correct and sit nicely on the body. Now, like you said, you'll only get one issue of it need to drag
you can
across.
locally fix that.
So it's really about the neck point being accurate
Shoulder
and
point.
being the neck point being accurate
No,
and then the shoulder point being, if anything, just too square, as you said.
Yes, but look at this. Your neck point. Is that your phone?
Yeah.
Survived.
And it's the new one.
That's fine.
Did actually something happen or?
No, it's fine.
Oh,
It's
okay.
still done.
So think about this. Imagine you have just like a circle as the neck circle around you, right? Now that neck circle on itself doesn't affect anything else until it connects to a shoulder point, right? Now, if you put a very low shoulder angle on a garment and you put it on a square person, the neck point is just the neck point. It sits around the neck. It's the shoulder point that's too low for that shoulder, which lifts everything up. You know what I mean? So having I was talking to this other guy who also kind of like thinks about these ideas, but we were talking about when you go through the textbooks of tailoring, there is so much talk and fuss about where is the neck point. Does anyone know where the neck point is? Where should the nape be? You know, but well, it depends on what you take as your anchor. But for me, I think the neckline in itself is the most irrelevant thing because it's everything else that you struggle with. The neckline is just something that hangs around the neck. It's the length relative to the panels, the angles of the shoulders which are distorted by the wrong or the inappropriate body for whoever it's being cut for, that changes that. So I would say your neck point can be anywhere, literally anywhere. And all you end up changing eventually is these lines here, all these vertical lines, and your shoulder angles, because this is the funny part. You bring this neck point further that way, and they call it crookening, right? What they say. Or you can pretty much achieve the same thing by, for example, letting out the front edge. The relation of the neck point has changed to the front edge and the sides. You know what I mean? So you can do all of that, but the main point is really the shoulder point, which causes all those distortions.
Okay.
Now, what was the question we were addressing when we were talking about this?
The shoulder angle.
Shoulder angle, yes. So safest is, like you said, eventually square, but it's not really super accurate. It's like I'd like to know what's the law. You know, what is the fundamental rule formula that relates the belly or the chest or the bust to the squareness of the front panel shoulder angle. So I haven't worked that out yet, but we can think about that as we go along, because that does mess up everything. I mean, you can even make it more complicated and say, well, what about seam displacement on top of that, right? That makes it even worse, because now not only is the belly affecting the the shoulder seam and the angle, but now you can also mess around with seam displacements, and that changes the angle on the flat pattern as well. But to some extent, you could say, let's just go for a fixed place for the shoulder, so that we don't mess around too much with seam displacements and just focus on the fundamentals. But that's it so far. Yeah, that's it. That's pretty much it.
No, I mean, I think it, from start to finish, it's a very simple and easy to follow method. So it's now about then getting that
fine-tuning the steps,
fine-tuning, and then making it work very nicely with the fitting videos and instructions. So when the garment goes on, how do you see this and the videos go together from your perspective? Well, so when I first called you about this, and we were looking at the art of tailoring, or how to fit gentlemen's garments. Kim and I were talking about looking at faults and identifying faults and looking at patterns and seeing how they can be rectified. I still think that's probably an interesting way of going about it, and doing it in a few ways of looking at faults, major faults that are isolated, and then common faults that work in combination with each other.
Right.
So you can see both how to identify the correct fault when it's kind of hidden behind a number of faults. And then also, okay, this is just what
default
looks like.
Yeah.
So this is what it looks like when the balance is off.
So you end up with a series of videos which all address a particular fault with the explanation of how this works and relates to the pattern, why this is the case, how it looks like on the figure, how it looks on the front, side, back, and how you can remedy that. You get like a portfolio of that kind of thing. Right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If you think of it, if you broke that into a book itself, of separate chapters of this is what just a tight waist looks like. This is what balance issues look like. This is what drop shoulders, shoulders look like. So on and so forth. And then you go into the next level of complications of, okay, this is what it looks like when the balance is out and the waist is tight.
Yes. Well, I would say that's a very good idea, because it helps. You give people basically the references by doing that. That a 40-year-old tailor would have over time. But you give all the references there basically on demand.
It could be a quiz again, so as it was with the fitting things, with the body observations, it's now like the fitting problems. What is it again?
How would that look? You would.
What's wrong with this fitting?
Yeah.
Well, from my past book that I've just looked through, I'm going to say drop shoulder.
The only kind of counterpoint is then we go back kind of almost against your ethos of as making it as kind of simplified as possible, because then we're talking about volumes and volumes of material to cover every permutation of the body and of what a suit can look like at a fitting. And there's essentially an infinite amount of combinations that we could never address. So it's about looking at the core ones and looking at the core kind of interactions between faults that would be, I think, at least manageable.
I thought about what the previous conversation we had as well when we were talking. I think it was the first one. We were talking about whether it's good or bad to simplify things and to what extent to simplify them. And I think that I would really like it to be super simple, but I also am aware that simplicity doesn't come from something being initially simple. It really comes from complexity boiled down over time. Now, we could perhaps, like you say, look which one of the faults are the main faults, and then it's like you are likely in the first 2 years of pattern cutting, not likely, definitely going to encounter these 10 or whatsoever, or how many they are, and then just go on that. Because I still would like to have an expansive series as well,
It could grow.
You
You
could-
could start with the first 10,
Yes.
release it, and then as people are actually out there in the real world doing it, you get them to take photos of their fittings and
Yes.
upload them to us.
Yeah.
So then we can expand on the fitting book and be like, okay, these were the initial ones we did.
Yeah.
We've now received these images from you guys. We've cropped the faces off and everything, and be like, right, you've done this, you've done this, and then expand and expand. And it could be ever growing.
Yeah,
But also, there are cosmetic alterations
Right.
that we don't need to adjust. We are
style
adjust.
alterations, you mean?
I could cut a jacket with sleeves up to here.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I don't need to tell someone to length of that.
Yes.
Even jacket length is so subjective.
Yeah.
But balance isn't. So I think it's first identifying the faults that are not subjective.
Yeah.
So a tight armhole, something that's cut too high or too low, those things.
Yeah.
And we could literally go through it like the human body. We could just start identifying different
Sections
of
yeah.
the body,
Yeah.
of the jacket, and say, okay, this is now every aspect that we look at, and then we remove anything that can happen that is cosmetic.
Yes.
And then that's your boiled down blueprint for how to move forward with the videos, at least the initial videos.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to agree.
I think this is going to be a really interesting system for like newbies, because I know if I had this in college and I could print off a block and make anything from it, this is my shirt, this is my coat, this could be anything,
Yeah.
I'd be printing this off all the time. And then after a while I'd be like, okay, I'll figure out how this works now. Now I've had
Yeah.
I've had a load of fun,
That's exactly
and I've
right.
made a few shirts and a few jackets and stuff, and then
Yeah.
I'm like, right, I want to know how I do it,
Yeah.
and how I do it without the system. Is it possible?
Yeah.
Can I do it like on paper rather than printing it off? And I think that's going to be the fun thing, is seeing people's creations and how they decide they're going to use it. Because I don't know how many people are going to go, right, like hit me with all the information first,
Yeah.
or
It's
can I
difficult.
make a shirt?
Yeah.
Can I make a suit first?
Yeah.
That's a good point. At what stage does the system, or does anyone using the system, know how to take that block pattern and turn it into a morning suit or a shirt
At what stage?
'Cause
For us or for them?
for them?
It
Or
should-
for us, as if I'm going to use this, in 6 months' time,
Yeah.
I'm going to log on,
Yeah.
I put all my configurations in,
Yes.
and then I get that kind of, essentially it's a sloper pattern, isn't it? Or a block
It's like
pattern.
a block, isn't
Well,
it? Like a bodice
so
block.
yeah, but hold your horses, man. It's going. We are aiming to make that the pattern. Like a block is a block. Doesn't address the figuration and all of that. This addresses the figuration plus all the other things.
So when I
it-
say a block, I mean
My
my
block.
block.
your block, your
But then how-
ultimate block,
But then how
2000.
do I take that to shirt collar, shirt sleeves, or that same pattern to
Jacket.
evening dress coat?
Well, there are a few options. It also depends on how much knowledge you have about how those garments look like, for example. So if you know how a morning coat looks like
Things left, right, and center today. What's the matter with me?
drop it like it's hot, man. It's fine. So if you, for example, know what the style requirements of a morning coat are versus like, I don't know, a frock coat, whatever.
Yeah.
Then you could make the alterations, because if you have a pattern that fits and you have to add lines here and there for style purposes without making the pattern too small, for example, then you could. But the other thing is, the other option is, if this develops, it could also have a morning coat version. Like, what garment do you intend to build? And then you like morning coat, and then it says, okay, let's go through the same procedure, but now I'm also calculating the lines for a morning coat. You know what I mean?
Would that be?
Because if you have to alter a block yourself, like manually,
Yeah.
on paper, you need to know, first of all, how to alter a block. So you have to have some experience. I
Yeah.
assume that you have seen some of the videos, or the student has seen some of the videos, and they have some experience with fitting people and different garments. They've looked at various textbooks of how a morning coat looks like in terms of lines, and then they try to chop that up in pieces to make it a morning coat. But that's more advanced, I think.
Yeah,
That's definitely more advanced, and I think that's for someone who has at least used this system or any system a few times.
Well, then we'll bring it back because the pattern doesn't have a lapel on it or a break line.
It could have.
Okay, so because that would be when I use the word block, I don't mean it as the general slope or pattern for anyone.
Yeah.
I mean a personalized bespoke block for an individual.
I thought Reza said at the end, you do this and you put the editor on and you're like, right, I want lapel now.
Yeah,
One button,
so
lapel,
that
round
okay,
face.
got it.
So I want to, for example, draw a line, a pocket, a dart, a cylinder, or add, I don't have add here, but add a break line and a shirt collar or this, or change whatever. Or from the very beginning, like when you log on and you're like, before the measurements jump in, it's like, is what do you intend to make? Trousers, shirts, frock coat, morning coats, pigeon coats. So we could do that, and then because it's a matter of lines, really, it's drawings.
No, absolutely.
And the good thing about style lines is that you don't need to really think too much about the technical correctness. It's just a style line.
Yeah.
So if you want to have like a super wavy lapel, like whatever, go for it, man.
But I just think that if you're trying to also capture people who are very new to the trade, that they will not have the confidence of just drawing in those lines.
Yeah.
And that they might need a set of tools.
Yeah.
To then put in the lapel
Sure
in
thing.
the right way. Because you and I, the three of us, I'm sure even Mowgli can, after seeing so much of your work, can look at a pattern and be like, okay, I want to draw this here, and here's my lapel shape.
Yeah.
But for someone who hasn't done that, it might be a bit daunting.
I used to chastise my tutor in uni in my first year and be like, but what's a normal peak? And he'd be like, just draw one. And I'm like,
Yeah.
but how?
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm drawing, and
That's
that's a
correct.
peak. Obviously now I'm fine, but I think that to take away that fear of being like, peak, don't know.
Well,
So it's
that's
already incorporated in the system in a way.
yeah. You can definitely incorporate it, and then you can also say even what type of peak do you want? Like a flat one, a shallow one, a wide one, a narrow one. You could do all of that. And to be honest, I think if you are using this for the first time and you don't have any type of experience, I think you would probably want to go through this as this looks like, make 2 calicos at least with like a sleeve in it, just to understand pattern cutting a little bit, if it's really your first time. So it's probably unlikely for someone to jump first time into a morning coat. But
You never know.
but you never know. Yeah, you never know. If they did want to, we could develop this to the point that it could do that. Because one of the things I like to do, and I know this is weird for many people, but it's got a purpose. You cannot just, well, you can. I'm not saying you cannot, but just follow with me for a second. You cannot just for the sake of things being handmade stick to the idea that things should be handmade. Because the person who does something handmade, and I'm doing things handmade, so by no means am I saying it's a bad thing, but here's the idea behind what I'm saying. You can have someone who does things handmade and it's the crappiest thing to have ever been created, right? Now, that poor person who creates the crappy thing perhaps hasn't had good training, or they don't know some of the fundamental things regarding pattern cutting, but it doesn't justify for them to just say, oh, it's handmade, so therefore it has to be good. And also, I know how to do things handmade, but sometimes I just don't want to spend the time. It takes too much time, like 3 hours drafting a pattern, going through all of those lines, rubbing out things, using all that paper. Sometimes you want efficient, It's like, you don't go to a darkroom to develop your family photos anymore, probably. No. You know what I mean? But now imagine that photographers for always would have insisted that you should do that. Well, then you don't get all the innovation around digital photography, Photoshop, Lightroom, all of that, So by having something like this, I really hope to encourage at least some tailors who know what's what in the first place to use some efficiency tools so that they have more time to think about other things as well, innovations, or just improve their hand and work or whatsoever, you know? So I don't think it's a bad thing for people to have this. I think it's gonna open up, because the reason why I started tailoring was, you know, the crappy tailor I told you about. But when I went online, there was nothing about jacket patterns. So how much time would I have saved if I did have something like this? And then I would kind of like, either most of us are self-taught anyway. So why bother going through 6 years of some other, I mean, yeah, there are good things around it, and you get to learn people, and you get to be in an environment and all of that. But just for learning the craft, I really don't need 6 years. You know, give me 3 months and I'll figure it out with the help of a tool like this, for example. So, yeah, that's that.
So what's next? Are we going to start measuring up? And
Yeah, let's do this.